So, there I was, standing outside the quaint little coffee shop where Clara had decided to play Cupid. Clara's been my go-to gal since high school, always into stars and numbers and all that jazz. Me? I've always kept my feet on the ground. But here I was, ready to meet Mr. Perfect Match according to her numerology charts. I spotted Clara waving frantically from inside. Pushing through the door, the bell jingled loudly, drawing a few glances. "There you are, Elle. I was starting to think you'd chickened out," Clara teased as I made my way over. "Chickened out? Me? Never," I scoffed, rolling my eyes but smiling. "But remind me again why I let you talk me into these things." Clara's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Because deep down, you know I'm right. Plus, you've gotta admit, your dating pool has been more like a dating puddle lately." "Harsh, Clara. Really harsh," I said, but I couldn't help laughing. That was Clara for you, no filter, but usually right. Just then, a guy walked in, tall, dark hair, easy smile. The kind of smile that reached his eyes and made you want to smile back, even if you were trying to stay cool. "Ah, that's him," Clara whispered, giving me a nudge. "Mark, over here." Mark turned our way and walked over. He had a confident stride but not too cocky, which was good. We shook hands, and his grip was just right, not too firm, not too weak. "Nice to meet you, Elsie. Clara's told me a lot about you," he said, his voice warm. We ordered our coffees, and I went for my usual, black, no sugar. Mark went for the same, and Clara teased, "Look at you two, already a perfect match." As we settled into our seats, the initial awkwardness melted away surprisingly quickly. Mark was easy to talk to. He didn't just talk about himself either, he asked about my work as a video editor, genuinely interested in the details. "So, you edit videos? That sounds cool. Bet you've seen all sorts of crazy footage," Mark said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. "You have no idea," I laughed. "From wedding bloopers to failed YouTube stunts, I've seen it all." "What about you?" Clara mentioned something about engineering. "Yeah, I work with a small firm downtown. We handle all sorts of projects, from bridges to buildings. Keeps me on my toes," he explained. The conversation flowed from work to movies to our shared guilty pleasure of bad reality TV. It felt like talking to an old friend rather than a guy I just met. As the evening wound down, Mark said, "I had a great time tonight, Elsie. Maybe we can do this again? Just the two of us?" I hesitated for a split second, old habits die hard, but nodded. "I'd like that." We exchanged numbers, and as I walked home later, I couldn't help but think maybe Clara's numerology wasn't all nonsense. Mark really did seem like a great guy. But only time would tell. For now, I'd just enjoy the flutter in my stomach that I hadn't felt in a long time. When I moved in with Mark, everything felt like it was falling into place. He had this old house, a bit of a fixer-upper, but it had charm. We started talking about making it our forever home, and that's when the whole money talk came up. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and we were lounging on the couch with cups of coffee, going over some bills and future plans. "Elle, you know how I've got that mortgage hanging over me, right?" Mark started, a bit hesitant. "I've been thinking, maybe we could use some of your savings to pay it off. It would be a load off, and we could start fresh, you know?" I took a sip of my coffee, buying some time. My savings weren't just rainy day money, it was the inheritance from my grandma, meant to be something special, something she saved for me. "Mark, that's a lot of cash. We talking about all of it?" I asked, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. "Not all, no. Just the mortgage part. We'd still have plenty left for the house and maybe some extras," he said quickly, like he'd rehearsed it. I set my coffee down and turned to face him. "Look, I get where you're coming from, but that's big money. And it was meant for my future, you know?" Mark nodded, reaching for my hand. "I know, Elle, and this is our future, right? Together? Paying off that mortgage would mean less stress about finances. We could even start talking about renovations or a new car." I pulled back a little, thinking it over. It wasn't just money, it was security, my security, and Grandma's wish. But then, wasn't a happy, stress-free home with Mark worth it? Okay, suppose we do this, clear your mortgage. What's next? We're just going to jump into renovations? I asked, feeling the weight of the decision. Yeah, think about it. We could redo the kitchen, maybe knock out that wall to open up the living room. Make it really ours, he said, his eyes lighting up with every word. And furniture? We gonna spruce up that too? I was warming up to the idea, picturing the house transforming with us. Absolutely. New couch, dining set, maybe even that patio set you were eyeing last week, Mark replied, squeezing my hand. So, we did it. Paid off his mortgage and started planning the renovations. The next few months were a whirlwind of contractors and paint samples. The house was turning into what we'd imagined, and it felt good, mostly. There were moments, late at night, when I'd wonder if I'd put too much into this, too soon. But then I'd see Mark, all excited about picking out fixtures or tiles, and I'd tell myself it was right. The phone call that shook our newly renovated home came late one evening. Mark's phone lit up, buzzing insistently on the kitchen counter. The look on his face when he picked up told me it wasn't good news. Mom? Slow down, what's happened? Mark paced the length of our kitchen. I could only catch bits and pieces, but enough to piece together the emergency. His dad had a stroke. Okay, we're coming. Just hang tight. Mark ended the call and turned to me, his face pale. It's Dad, he's had a stroke. We need to go, Elle. Packing a bag in a whirl, we drove through the night to his parents' place in the next city over. We arrived to find Mark's mom, Linda, a small, wiry woman with more nerves than calm. She was fretting in the doorway as we pulled up. Mark, thank God you're here, she said, pulling him into a tight hug. Then her eyes landed on me. Elsie, you too. Inside, the house was dim, the air thick with tension. Linda led us straight to where Mark's dad, Joe, lay in bed, his left side immobile, his face drawn. Dad, it's me, Mark. We're here now, Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. Joe's right hand twitched, his eyes showing a flicker of recognition. Linda hovered by the bed, wringing her hands. He can't speak. The doctors, they don't know if he'll recover fully. What are we looking at here, Linda? Does he need rehab? A nurse? I asked, feeling out of my depth but needing to know the plan. Linda shook her head, a stubborn set to her mouth. No, he stays here. He wouldn't want to be anywhere else. But Linda, think about professional care. He needs specialists. I pushed gently, knowing she was scared but also aware of what was at stake. No, Elsie. We can't afford that, and this is his home. He stays, Linda snapped, her tone final. At a family dinner that night, the air was tense as Mark and Linda laid out their expectations. Mark took a deep breath. Elle, I have to head back for work, but Mom needs help here with Dad. You've seen how hard it is for her. Linda nodded, her gaze fixed on me. Yes, Elsie, please. I can't manage on my own with my sciatica acting up. It means so much to us. I felt the weight of their gaze, the desperation in Linda's voice. Mark was looking at me too, his eyes pleading. I knew what my answer would be before I even said it out loud. After Mark left, the reality set in. It was just me and Linda, and mostly just me, taking care of Joe. Linda's bouts of sciatica left her bedridden many days, and I was running the house, managing medications, and trying to keep up with my own work remotely. The days were turning into a blur of endless tasks and mounting frustrations. Linda, blaming everything on her own health issues, didn't lift a finger around the house. Worse, she had a knack for making me feel like nothing I did was ever enough. Elsie, are you going to sit at that computer all day? Linda's voice would slice through the quiet of the house like a knife. I was hunched over my laptop, trying to meet a video editing deadline, the stress evident in my tightly furrowed brow. I'm working, Linda. This is my job. I'd respond, my voice strained but calm, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. It doesn't look like much work to me, she'd scoff, shuffling off with an air of disapproval. I bit back the sharper retorts teetering on the tip of my tongue. After all, she was family, and family meant biting your tongue until it bled, right? But it was hard, especially when I felt more like a maid than a daughter-in-law. Each day, I cooked, cleaned, and cared for Joe, my father-in-law, who still hadn't regained his ability to speak. His eyes, full of gratitude and apology, often met mine, offering silent thanks that Linda never voiced. During one of my increasingly rare calls with Mark, I tried to explain how strained things had become. "Mark, it's tough here. Your mom, she's really hard on me. And your dad needs more care than I can manage on top of everything else," I confided, the weight of my exhaustion evident in my voice. "I know it's hard, Elle. Just hang in there a bit longer, okay? Dad will get better, and once he's up on his feet, you can come back home," Mark pleaded. Determined to do more for Joe, I completed a course in massage therapy tailored for stroke recovery. Each evening, after the dinner dishes were cleared and Linda had retired to her room with a grunt, I'd help Joe into a comfortable chair and gently work his stiff muscles. Things took a surprising turn when Linda announced she was feeling better and wanted to visit Mark. "I think I'll go stay with your husband for a few months, see the city," she declared one morning out of the blue. Her news should have filled me with dread at the thought of being alone, but instead, a wave of relief washed over me. When she left, the house felt lighter, as if her departure had lifted a heavy veil that had been smothering me. Finally alone, I established a new routine. Mornings were for Joe. We developed a silent camaraderie, communicating through gestures and shared smiles. I'd massage his limbs, encouraging movement, and his improvement, however slight, felt like victories in a war I'd thought we were losing. Afternoons and evenings were mine again. I reclaimed my time and dove back into my video editing with renewed vigor. Without Linda's constant nagging, I found my productivity soaring. I'd work late into the night, the glow of my laptop a beacon of normalcy in the otherwise turned upside-down world. Evenings were the hardest. I'd sit in the quiet after dinner, missing Mark, missing my old life, but also appreciating the peace. "I think we're doing okay, Joe," I'd say as we settled in after our dinner, speaking more to fill the silence than out of necessity. Joe would nod, his eyes crinkling in agreement or perhaps gratitude. Half a year had rolled around, and it was amazing to see how much Joe had improved. He was not only talking, but had also started getting around with a new wheelchair I helped pick out for him. It was a game changer. He even began doing things for himself, like making his own snacks and managing his medication, which seriously lightened my load. During this time, Joe and I had grown incredibly close, so much that he started calling me his daughter, which warmed my heart every time he said it. It wasn't just about care anymore, it was about family, about the bond we had formed. One lazy afternoon, we were both in the living room, Joe in his wheelchair, flipping through channels, and me with my laptop, trying to catch up on emails. A thought had been nagging at me for a while, and seeing him so active and independent brought it to the forefront. "Joe, can I ask you something?" I began, hesitating a bit as I closed my laptop. "Of course, kiddo. What's on your mind?" Joe looked over, his face open and inviting. "Well, I was wondering, why didn't you ever consider going to a nursing home or maybe even short-term care at the hospital? It might have made your recovery easier," I said, genuinely curious. Joe looked genuinely surprised. "A nursing home?" I thought about it. Actually, I wouldn't have minded that at all. I've even got some money saved up just in case I needed to go to a better place than what the basic insurance covers. I frowned, confused. "Really? Linda told me you were completely against it, that you wanted to stay here no matter what. She said there was no extra money for anything else." Joe's face hardened slightly. "That's not true, Elsie. I never said I wanted to stay here no matter what. And the money, it's there. I guess she didn't want me using it on a nursing home." That conversation left a sour taste in my mouth. It seemed there were decisions being made without Joe's input, which didn't sit right with me. But before I could dig deeper, my work pulled me back in. I'd landed a major video editing project that demanded almost all my attention. It was a big break for me, a chance to really make a name for myself in the industry. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Joe was doing well, my career was on an upswing, but there was a void where Mark used to be. His visits had become non-existent, and his calls were brief and distracted. Busy at work was always his excuse. As Joe's health stopped causing concern, I thought it was time to mend things at home too. With a heart full of hopeful anticipation, I packed up some of my things, hugged Joe goodbye, and headed back to the house that Mark and I had turned into a home. It was late evening when I arrived, the neighborhood cloaked in darkness, the familiar glow of our porch light a beacon in the night. But something was off. As I approached the front door, my key wouldn't fit into the lock. Confused and slightly anxious, I rang the doorbell. After a few tense moments, the door swung open, revealing a woman I'd never seen before. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing me suspiciously. I live here with my husband. Who are you?" My voice trembled, a mix of confusion and growing dread setting in. "I'm just watching the house for the new owner," she responded, her tone cautious yet firm. "New owner? There must be some mistake. This is my house," I said, the firmness in my voice belying the shock that was starting to take hold. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the house has been sold. Maybe you should call your husband or something," she suggested before she started to close the door. Panic rising, I stepped back, pulling out my phone to call Mark. My hand shook so badly, I nearly dropped it twice. When he finally answered, his voice was cold, detached. "Mark, what's going on? Why is there someone else in our house?" I demanded, my voice cracking under the strain. "Elsie, I sold the house. We needed to move on. I bought a new place with my mom. There's no room for you there," he said, his words like ice shards piercing through me. "But all the money I put into that house, our house. How could you sell it without even telling me?" I could barely keep the desperation out of my voice. Mark laughed, a sound so chilling it echoed in my ears. "You think you can prove any of that? Good luck, Elsie. Are you divorcing me?" My voice was a whisper, barely audible even to my own ears. "The papers are on their way to Dad's. You can sign them and send them back," Mark said flatly. "Mark, please, what about your dad? What about Joe?" I pressed, desperate for some semblance of sanity in this madness. "He's no longer my concern. Mom's got the will in her favor now. We don't need you, or him. Why don't you take care of him if you're so concerned?" His tone was dismissive, as if discarding not just his father but our entire life together. The line went dead, the finality of the tone signaling the end of everything we had built. I stood there in the dark, alone, the cold night air wrapping around me like a shroud. The woman in the house turned off the porch light, and suddenly the beacon that had always signified home was gone, leaving me in darkness. I stumbled back to my car, my mind a whirlwind of betrayal, pain, and disbelief. The drive back to Joe's was a blur, my thoughts racing as I tried to piece together the shattered remnants of my life. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? Steeling myself, I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. It opened before I could knock, Joe looking up from his wheelchair, his expression worried. "Oh, Joe, it's all gone. The house, Mark, he's left us with nothing." Joe took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. "Elsie, I've known about their scheming for a while now," he began, his voice grave but steady. "After my stroke, when I couldn't speak or move, I heard them. Linda and Mark, plotting right in front of me." I stared at him, aghast. "What? You knew?" My voice cracked under the strain of my emotions. Joe nodded slowly. "Yes, I heard them planning to sell the house out from under you. And worse, they planned to dump me in some cheap care facility once they cashed in on my assets." I felt a cold fury building inside me, replacing the despair. How could they be so cruel? To you, to me? I struggled to wrap my head around the depth of their deceit. Joe's face hardened. "They're only after the money, Elsie. That's all they've ever cared about." He paused, taking a moment before he reached into the pocket of his cardigan. Pulling out a set of keys, he placed them in my hand. But I've made moves of my own. I bought the house back, secretly. It's yours now, Elsie. I want you to have it. Tears welled up in my eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief mixed with a fierce determination. Joe, thank you. I don't know what to say. The very next day, we met with Joe's lawyer, a seasoned man with a no-nonsense attitude named Mr. Gibson. In his office, filled with legal books and papers, Joe made it clear he wanted to change his will. I want everything to go to Elsie. She's the daughter I should have had, Joe declared, his voice unwavering. Mr. Gibson nodded, taking notes. I'll prepare the new documents. Elsie, you're about to become the sole heir to Joe's estate. Grateful, I simply nodded, overwhelmed by Joe's trust in me. We then tackled the issue of the money I'd invested in Mark's house. Mr. Gibson was methodical. We'll need to prove your contributions to the mortgage. Bank statements, any receipts you might have, witness statements from the bank officials. Fortunately, I'd kept meticulous records. I have everything. We can prove every penny I put in, I assured him, pulling out a folder stuffed with documents. That's good. We'll file for the recovery of your funds. They can't just take what you've rightfully invested, Mr. Gibson said, starting to outline a plan of action. With each step we planned, I felt more empowered, ready to reclaim what was mine and protect Joe from any more harm. When the divorce papers arrived later that week, I signed them without a second thought. I was ready to close that chapter of my life. A week later, Mark and Linda showed up at my doorstep, the house they once called theirs, now indisputably mine. Their faces were the picture of desperation. I had already heard through my lawyer that they were panicking over the lawsuit I planned to file, demanding back the $150,000 I had put into the mortgage. Elsie, please, we need to talk, Mark began, his voice shaky, avoiding eye contact as if the guilt was too much to bear. Linda chimed in, wringing her hands nervously. We're so sorry, Elsie. It all got out of hand. Please, can't we just put this behind us? I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, not moved by their distress. Sorry? After everything you've done? You think a simple apology will fix it? But we're family, Linda tried again, her voice trembling. That ship sailed the moment you betrayed me and Joe, I replied sharply, the anger in my voice clear and unyielding. Seeing that their pleas were getting them nowhere, I decided to twist the knife a little deeper. And just so you know, Joe has changed his will. Everything goes to me now. The grin I wore was cruel, sweetened by the justice of it all. Linda's face went pale, and she fainted right there on my new porch. Mark, flustered and embarrassed, had to catch her before she hit the ground. The trial that followed was nothing short of a circus. Mark fought tooth and nail for every cent, refusing to admit that the money I invested was mine. Linda, ever the actress, put on quite a show in court, feigning illness to gain the judge's sympathy. But the evidence was undeniable. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. The defendant is ordered to repay $150,000 to the plaintiff. The evidence supports her claim unequivocally. Relief washed over me as justice was served. The gavel's final bang was like music to my ears. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, free from the chains Mark and Linda tried to place on me. Back at home, the house felt more like a sanctuary than ever. Joe and I celebrated quietly, a small toast to new beginnings and to justice. Life settled into a comfortable routine after that. I resumed my video editing work, finding joy in the craft that had always been my passion. Joe was more than just a father-in-law now, he was family, a true friend. News reached us through friends that Mark and Linda had to sell their flashy new apartment to cover the repayment. Now they were living in a rental, much humbler than before. It was a fitting turn of events, though I took no pleasure in their downfall. Just last week, Clara, my numerologist friend, called me up. Elsie, I found the perfect guy for you. His birth date lines up beautifully with yours. I couldn't help but laugh, a light, free sound that felt good on my lips. Thanks, Clara, but I think I'm going to stick to meeting people the old-fashioned way. Life's been too crazy for any more predictions. She laughed along with me, and we chatted for a few more minutes about life and love, the conversation light and easy.